Hello and welcome to the Garibaldi Red podcast and Nottingham Forest podcast. No, I'm not Max Hayes. I'm once again your surrogate for today as Max is studying for exams, for end of year exams, end of course exams. Not sure where he is in the process, but I know he's buried right now and probably not that excited to cover the Nottingham Forest game this evening off the back of a Wembley disappointment this past weekend. Forest hoping for an uptick in their fortunes. It wasn't to be on a wet night at the City Ground. I'm your host this evening, Mark Turner, despite what the name tag says, joined by one of our pod regulars, my contributor, my fellow contributor to the show, Aussie Dave. How's it going, Dave? How are you doing today?
Mate, well, just we're on a bad run at the moment. I did actually run into Max at Wembley on the weekend, which was terrific fun. Boy, we're first in the table for fans. The experience of the fan group at Wembley was terrific, but geez, it's just a little bit tough tonight going through that one or this afternoon where we are in New York. So I'm here for you, mate. And yes, we're like the backup hosts. And so I'm here to help you and go through it together.
Fantastic. I look forward to it. I like name checking my fellow Forest fans on this show. Folks, regular listeners and viewers will know. No, it's not going to be Trevor this evening. It's going to be a gentleman by the name of Matt Pollard, who is, he and I have done some writing over here together. He's far and ahead of me in terms of his journalistic creds, but he was actually in England this past week and also attended the Manchester City Nottingham Forest FA Cup semi-final. I don't quite know how he got tickets, but nevertheless, he was there. He was a Yank in attendance. And also, to your point, Dave, said that the Forest fans were, to a man and woman, just magnificent. He really enjoyed engaging with everybody. So kudos to everybody who's there, who clearly represented Nottingham and Forest.
I've got a story for you, Mark. I actually met a lovely gentleman, and sadly, I wanted to learn how to sign. So I met a deaf Nottingham Forest man by the name of Jordan, who he and his brother had travelled far and wide. His brother had actually come from Australia to watch the Wembley match. And out of that whole experience, I felt I got a new best mate. And so, it's sadly for him, he doesn't hear the sound of the Nottingham Forest fans, but he certainly hears the reverberations and he can see it and the passion and the scarves and whatnot. And it was very moving. And just the performance of the fans, boy, we deserve something. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll set Wembley aside. That is now far in the rearview mirror. Everything was about this evening's game back at the Fortress, or what we previously knew as the Fortress, the City Ground, welcoming Brentford to town. This did not seem like the victory at least did not seem like too a kind of a journey too far, but evidently I'm quite sure what happened this evening. Dave, Forest, of course, went down 2-0, goals in both halves from Brentford. We'll obviously get into the weeds and talk about how those goals came about, but just broad strokes, Dave. What was your take on the match, kind of 30,000-foot view?
Well, coming into the match, the team that was picked, you look at it and you think that is out and out, undeniably our strongest team.
Yeah.
Like on paper, I'm being credited as being a Yates doubter, but I have not been a Yates doubter. It is out and out our strongest team across the board. And I felt, okay, we're on here after the strong second half against Villa and the showing against Man City where we hit the post 3 times. I thought we can do Brentford here. We'll deal with that. We're in the top 5 teams. And so it was an immense confidence, and perhaps that was too much. But I think the impact of the FA Cup and those extra couple of matches is starting to shine. I was warned by a Crystal Palace fan from them in the 2016 season when they made the final that they dropped out of European places because of a big FA Cup run. And I think we're starting to see the effects of that. And after concluding on it, I like to talk about, which of our players are in form? And really, our players that are in form is Anthony Elanga, Zach Abbott, and the fans. And I'm not sure any of the rest of the players in our team, you could say, are really absolutely hitting it out of the park at the moment. But the defensive lapses, I just don't know where that came from with Milenkovic. But I know I've got to stay chronologically.
No, we're stepping in for Max. It's a free-for-all. I'm going to try and rein you in, but you can do what you like, my friend. It's an interesting point you make in regards to player form. So I throw Matt Sals in there as being a player who's been pretty.
He's in form.
Yeah, pretty brilliant in most every game this season. And I don't think the players are in a bad vein of form right now. I think they're not synchronized, right? So some players who are playing really well, while other players not so well. And then when those players hit form, the other players kind of go off the rails a little bit. It feels like we can't get everybody on the same hymn sheet at the same time. Or if we can, it's all in the same half. So they have one terrible half followed by one glittering half, kind of like we saw at Wembley against Manchester City. It just feels like everything isn't quite in sync right now. Would you agree with that?
I think part of it is just the slight downturn in form can just push you off a little bit. Like Aina he just was not as fast and on it and was rusty. Chris Wood looks a little rusty. And, we copped a couple of yellow cards for Anderson and Gibbs White. That puts their tackles off a little bit. And the margins in these matches can be so fine. And that might be enough to have just unsettled Nottingham Forest.
Yeah.
And so, but also, the other worry that I've got, Mark, is when we go a goal down, we don't seem to have a second hymn to sing from. It's like we've got one song and one hit wonder that we can sing. And if that one doesn't go too well on the set, then what do we do next? When 1-0 down, I think maybe someone in the comments can help us and tell the exact number. But I think we've only won one match when we've gone down by a goal. And I think we've lost 12 or something like that. It's a very concerning number. As soon as it goes in, that first goal is just so important for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, particularly given how we play. So obviously we like to sit deep, absorb pressure, and then hit teams on the counter. And that's so much more difficult to do when you're already trailing by a goal. Interestingly, Dave, Forest actually edged the possession stats tonight, about 55% to 45%. And there aren't many teams that look at that and go, well, that's a negative thing. But I think, again, given how we played this season, generally speaking, we're not used to having the bulk of possession, nor do we seek it. So you have to wonder as well, we're Forest struggling with that a little bit this evening. There have been a couple of other occasions this year where they have had the lion's share of possession and we haven't seen the best of them. So we're not going to give them excuses or outs, but again, everything looked a little bit off this evening. So let's hone in on, well, with the exception of the team sheet. I mean, to your point, that looked great before a whistle was blown. And Forest start into the match, and it was a very open game. I was kind of surprised to see how open it was, and Brentford certainly getting a few sights on goal and causing a few concerning moments for Forest. They obviously a good ball playing team, and they know how to make it from one end of the field to the other, creating little triangles and the like. But the opening goal from Shada, was a complete antithesis of that, in that it was just a hopeful ball pumped forwards, confusion in defence, which I think largely rests on the shoulders of Milenkovic. Aina with an unfortunate slip, and Sals really couldn't do anything with the shot that followed. What was your take on that goal?
Well, David Brutton in the commentaries couldn't understand it and said, "Well, did he get a call? And this is Milenkovic regarding to,
right.
Like, why did he just suddenly stop? It's just so uncharacteristic of him to just not play that. And then Aina was a little unlucky, but Aina was slipped a few times during the night. I noticed. Did he perhaps have a problem with his feet or his boots, or not sure what it was? But it just seemed a simple long ball. And to be honest, thinking about it, it actually looked like Nottingham Forest from the past 2 seasons is what the team looked like tonight in many ways, not able to deal with a simple long ball. It reminded me of that Jordan Pickford one against Everton a few seasons ago, where we just simply didn't deal with it. And it's just heartbreaking. And look, Milenkovic doesn't deserve to be discredited for that moment, but he's got such a positive reputation that, we hold him on such high regard, and he just blew it in that moment. So you just know Forest going down by 1.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. I mean, Milenkovic has been certainly a candidate for player of the season in terms of just how good he's been and how consistent he's been alongside players like the aforementioned Matt Sals, Chris Wood, and 1 or 2 others. Tonight was certainly an aberration for him. We are going to go a little off script here, Dave. I'm not going to stay pure chronological. I am going to jump straight to the second. I know, right? Breaking.
Well, fair enough.
Well, there's so much ground for us to cover in 30 minutes. I want to just fast forward for a moment to the second goal, because we're talking about Milenkovic and inarguably, The second goal was also Milenkovic's fault as well. Again, another long ball out the back. Slippy surface, obviously, with the rain coming down heavily at that point. Not quite sure what Murillo's thinking or doing. Probably thinking, you know what, Milenkovic is going to clean this up. So he couldn't have made a header, obviously, but Murillo kind of actively disengages from the play, if you like, allowing the ball to float over him, thinking Milenkovic is going to kind of tidy up at the back. Milenkovic allows the ball to bounce, and then the most dangerous player in Brentford's attack is through on goal. And his finish, Wiss's finish, actually, I think was a thing of beauty. Yeah, what a wonderful chip over Matt Sells to give Brentford their second and ultimately game finishing goal tonight. What was your take on that second goal? Again, would you put the onus on Milenkovic there?
Well, it looked like Sunday Park football where the ball just gets hoofed up the field and you're hoping for a gamble. And Murillo looked to be shielding whoever their player was off the ball to not get it. And then was it a sense of Milenkovic, perhaps a touch of inexperience dealing with English weather, perhaps, and not understanding that the ball would skid the way that it did? It was one of those, it skid more than he might have expected it to, and then it went over him. And I don't think you could blame Matt Sells for not being able to make the save there. It was an exquisite finish. It was, Milenkovic wasn't that far away from him, and Sells came out and says one of the top couple of keepers in the Premier League, and Wissa just finished it off. Again, just a lapse in concentration from Milenkovic that just cost us, any chance that we really had of coming back into the game. And at 2-0, you really know that we're in trouble. I think it's, I don't know when the last time was we came back from a 2-0 down. Or maybe someone else in the comments can help us out there, but you just knew it was curtains, didn't you?
Before we dig into some of the stats and discuss the opportunities that Forest created and the moves that Nuno made as well to try and inspire the team to do something offensively, do we have anything in the comments? We pull anything up here yet, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go through the comments. Look, Dave G on Facebook is giving us some positivity and just saying, look, we move on to the next game. Come on, you Reds. And I can see the point there. Let's respond to this one by CCR, which says, ever since Nuno won Manager of the Month, it's all gone wrong. Do we agree with that, Mark? Frequently does, doesn't it? How often do you see that?
All right. So I agree. From a pure number standpoint, I agree with, you can't argue with the fact that things have been a little rocky since then. However, do I think that's anything to do with Nuno? No, I don't. I mean, I think you were skirting around and didn't kind of go headlong into, and maybe you didn't mean to, but the suggestion that Forest's squad is a little thin on the ground and players are feeling, they're getting leggy. We're 5 games from the end of the season, off the back of a grueling season, a long cut run. We haven't got the depth of the bench. We've talked about that ad nauseum. Those things, I think, are more contributing factors to why we're struggling right now, as opposed to, Nuno picking up a gong for the second time this season. But that'd be my take.
Well, it could be a touch of complacency, but certainly in the Forest message chats, and Mark, the question of why didn't we invest in the January transfer window for anybody? I know that we talked about this also ad nauseum. Geez, a third striker now would have been useful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would have been. I mean, I think there's a couple of areas in the field where we could do with additional strength off the bench, but absolutely in that centre forward position. I mean, we've known that. We knew that before the season started, quite frankly. So why it wasn't addressed in January, who knows? But it certainly seems to be an area now where we're struggling significantly.
All right, I'll just hit through the rest of these comments. Show the 3 to go. So N2 War says, we've just run out of steam. It's been a monumental season. The issue is always going to be when Wood stopped converting. Wood just looks he looks the same as Aina, a little bit underdone since the injury and hasn't really looked the same player. And as the captain of Team Wood, I'm just not sure that he looks like he's going to score at the minute. His headers aren't finding the spot. Have we got a problem with him too, Mark?
Yeah. So I'm going to put a pin in that one because I do want to talk to you about Forest.
All right, we're going to talk about scoring.
One of which was a Wood header, yeah. So.
All right, okay, we'll come back to that one. Gary P in the comments says also never really looked like scoring. Still in our hands, we run out of steam. And then also,
before I would get back to the other point, in regards to that point, The opening statement, Gary, I agree with you 100%. As I was watching it, I was thinking, this is one of those games where we could be here for the next 40 or 50 hours taking pot shots at Brentford's goal, and we're never going to score. It felt like one of those evenings. Now, obviously, that's largely down to us not making the most of the chances that came our way, but it did feel like one of those nights. It felt like it could have gone on forever, and Forest would have not registered a goal.
Mm. And then Richie in the comments, a little lack of match fitness caught up with Ola, in my opinion. Defeats happen. It's part of the Premier League, and they and us are all human. You know, in that 95 season, Mark, when we had that brilliant third place finish, we lost 4 matches or 5 matches in a row in November and had an absolute horror run then, and then came storming back into it when everyone wrote us off or was silly enough to write us off. So maybe that can happen again.
Yeah, I think it's all about perspective. And so when we get done picking the bones out of this game, I do want to pivot into talking, I guess, more broadly about the Champions League, getting your perspective on that. And again, to me, just it's about perspective. So before we transition to that, let's just talk a little bit about then how the game concluded. So I like the move Nuno took to put Taiwo on up alongside Wood. I thought that was neat because we haven't seen that. I don't think we've ever seen that, but certainly it's a rarity to see the two.
We have.
Okay.
We saw it once and it was a disaster, Mark, and that's why you can't remember. That's why you can't remember when it was. It was the match he played. He started with both of them, and it was one of the early season matches, and we got done.
I was about to say, so it must have been horribly ineffective because
tonight,
despite the fact I liked the idea, it was horribly ineffective.
We had to try something, didn't he? And we don't have the wingers. So what options do you have? It's what do you want him to do? He's got to try something. And he's had to lose Callum Hudson-Odoi because of the injury.
Yeah.
And so Chris Wood's our top scorer, and we need to score to win. You can't take him off. So you've got to try Taiwo with him, don't you?
Yeah, no, I agree. And obviously throwing on Jota and then Sosa and I don't think our midfield covered itself in glory this evening. It was a highly combative game. I thought Brentford were very chippy, which is, I think, underscored by the fact they registered 5 or 6 yellow cards. But you can't hate a team for that. I mean, the fact that they're battling away and doing what they can to maintain possession or win cheap free kicks, we struggled a little bit in midfield. So I think, but to your point, I mean, Nuno had to do something anyway. So regardless, he had to sacrifice Yates. He had to sacrifice Anderson. I mean, these players had to go ultimately to bring on those offensive players to try and get something out of the game. And then Forest did have a spell there where they were, I won't say peppering Brentford's goal with attempts, but, Alanga had an effort that was well palmed away by the Brentford goalkeeper. Chris Wood had a header, the aforementioned header that he really should have put on frame. But again, perhaps that was down to a little bit to the rain. And then maybe the ball being a little greasy and him not getting the purchase he wanted. But there were opportunities. It just felt like everything was, again, we keep coming back to this, Dave, it was slightly off. Right? We talked about the players' games being slightly off or certain players performing and others not, and then vice versa. It just felt like that this evening. It felt like kind of the culmination of that. Everything was ever so slightly off, and that certainly included our shooting as well.
Well, I'll tell you one moment that was off. What about the Morgan Gibbs White Callum Hudson-Odoi worked free kick with clearly like trying to fake it?
I mean, was that what they were trying to do? You think? I don't know what was going
on. They were trying to fake them. That was a work that went wrong because for starters, Alanga normally kicks the free kick. It was on his side, and then they clearly just sacked him from kicking it for some reason to try this ridiculous move that then just didn't work because it was a poor play, a poor cross into the box anyway. And Alanga was also, I think that was really the example of just how everything went wrong. And even the crosses and it just seemed like everything was a yard off from where we needed to be, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. The amateur dramatics there were horrendous. But if you're going to do that, then you have to whip in a killer free kick, which unfortunately Morgan did. You know what, Dave, if we planned this better, we could have started the podcast that way. I could have been like, you could be like, no, you could. And after like, we've had at one another.
Who's going to say anything now? It's like, Yeah, we could have done that.
Over my words, which actually maybe I did anyway. So,
well, who knows?
Anyway, so yeah, 2-0 defeat. Really not much to say. Much more to say, I don't think, about this game, unless you have anything additional to add, Dave. It was just a pretty woeful night all round. but Forest need to pick themselves up quickly. They are still in contention for a Champions League spot. I know you're anxious to talk about that. I think you and I are maybe on slightly different sides of the argument in this regard. So why don't you take the baton and run with it? How does tonight's result impact Forest's opportunity to secure a Champions League spot?
Well, the descriptor that was going to go up for the podcast was going to be using the word, and our group chat was using the word dent or blow, and Mark didn't want to comment on either of those. And I said, well, I think it dents it. So as it stands now following the Brentford match, Nottingham Forest sit on 60 points with 4 matches to go. Reviewing past Premier League table finishes, the highest ever requirement to finish in 5th place was 70 points, with the 6th team being on 69 points. So a couple of things to take into consideration of whether this season is going to be like that. And I think it is because of the competitive nature of the top 7. That means if we've got to get to 70 points and be the highest scoring 5th placed team by points ever, then we've got to take essentially 3 wins and a draw from the last 4 matches, which makes the Chelsea match now a must get something out of. It doesn't kill us, but it certainly dents us. And the other matches around us certainly helps. So I'm not sure this is going to be the match that we're going to look back on and say, oh, this is the one that got away from us and cost us. But a win popping us back up to 3rd mark, you've got to admit, does really strengthen our chances.
Okay, so here's my position. I said before the game this evening that I felt as though 3 victories would be enough. That would put us on 69 points. And again, I'm not trying to be wise after the fact. That I said this before a ball was kicked. In fact, I was on the Premier League Fan Zone show saying that. So it's out there in the public zeitgeist, as it were. And I speculated that those 3 wins would probably come from the last 3 games. I suggested that tonight's game was going to be difficult, but obviously not beyond us. I would have expected at least a point this evening. I think the next match out is a tough one, right, against Palace, who are going to be buoyed by their semi-final victory, FA Cup semi-final victory at Wembley this past weekend. That being said, they may have players that we're a long way still from the FA Cup final, so they're probably not going to be resting players this far out, but they might. They may sit 1 or 2 players. They may engage in squad rotation a little more. And even those players that play might not quite be going full hell for leather. You can look at this 1 or 2 ways. You could say, you know what, if those players don't step up and compete, the manager's going to bench them. There's a chance that they might not even make it to the final, right? Because he's going to be ticked off by their effort levels. Or you might have those players kind of coming off the gas a little bit because they don't want to be injured. They want to make sure they're available for selection, that they're going to feature. And the manager's going to be sensitive to that a little bit. So you just don't quite know what you're going to get at Palace. But I'd say Palace is a tough one. Away at Palace is a tough one. Then we have Leicester, West Ham away. And West Ham have been horrendous the second half of the season. So I don't care if it's home or away. And then obviously Chelsea at the City Ground final game of the season. All 3 of those, Forest are more than capable of taking maximum points from. So I think 3 victories out of those 4 games will be enough. I honestly think 2 victories and a draw could potentially, it's edge of the seat stuff, but could potentially be enough. That's my position.
Well, to finish on 69 points and be 6th would be equal to the highest number of points ever finishing on 6th. So I can see your point. You're not wrong. And I also think Nottingham Forest are better as underdogs. So let's start being written off. Let's be in 6th place and storm this at the end, because I would back us. Yeah. If it's a win and in situation versus Chelsea in the last match, I back us. We knocked off Arsenal 1-0 with the Taiwo Awoniyi goal to make it. So, maybe we're not licked yet. So it definitely dents us, but it doesn't kill us off.
All right. So now I'm going to get into the land of contention.
Okay.
I'm also going to pull in the perspective piece. And I mentioned to Max, I've been wanting to do this for a couple of pods. I haven't been on, or schedules haven't lined up, but I want to get this out there because I think it's worth a conversation. So I'd love to get your take on this. And also I'd love to see some stuff in the comments as well. I don't think it's the end of the world if Forest don't make the Champions League. In fact, I'm erring on the side of I don't really much care. Now, I do care, of course. I want Forest to finish the season as well as they can. I want us to get all of our flowers. And I want to make sure we head into next season with a bolstered squad and an opportunity to compete both domestically and in Europe, right? But again, it's perspective. At the start of the season, there was nobody suggesting, forget Champions League, there was no one suggesting we were going to threaten European places, of which now it looks like the top 8 or maybe 9 spots, which is ridiculous, in the Premier League could secure European football. Nobody was talking about that was wearing a Garibaldi shirt inside the club or out. The Champions League, it feels like a bridge too far right now. I don't mean the making of it, I mean the competing in it. I feel like, and again, I say this, I recognize I'm saying this from the perspective of somebody who's not presently a season ticket holder. So I'm not at the City Ground every week or every other week. I don't have the ability to watch Forest against Barcelona, Forest against PSG, Forest against Bayern Munich. Like, my chances of getting to England and being able to be at the City Ground to watch those juggernaut games is minuscule, right? I might make it over for a game or two if I'm lucky and if I can get a ticket. So I recognize that those folks who are season ticket holders and regulars at the City Ground, they want those matches. Like, those are the memories they want to create. I totally get it. But I think there's a high degree of likelihood that Forest will get their butts handed to them in the Champions League and the whole experience will end with a whimper. I think there's a case to be made of us making the Europa and being in a Glasgow Rangers stroke West Ham situation where we can actually go deep. We're still playing high caliber European teams, but we have the opportunity to actually beat them and progress. And who knows, maybe even make it to the latter stages, possibly even another European final. So I understand monetarily why it's not as lucrative to be in any other competition but UCL, but I don't think it's the end of the world. I think in this incremental kind of development that we're seeing Forest go through right now, the next step, if the next step would be Europa League, I'm kind of okay with that. Am I an idiot? Dave?
Well, he's clearly not an idiot, because I would never call you an idiot. However, let's just ask you one quick question and build on that. If we make the Europa League next season, are we more likely to be in the Champions League the season after, or if we play in the Champions League next season? And so your point is it's a slow build. And so when you're in scale-up businesses, you don't want a hockey stick. And this is your point. And if we go to the Champions League now, we're going to be a hockey stick team. And we might be in a similar situation of the Premier League when we got the promotion and we weren't expecting it. And suddenly we've got a summer of buying 15 players and the squad is absolutely ripped apart. One worry I have for us if we don't make the Champions League is the retention of Murillo and Gibbs-White and a few of the absolute top players. And if we can retain those, and that's going to help. And it's not going to require the same wholesale changes. But when you look at the squad as it is now, if we're a Champions League team, then that's really going to be the end of the Forest careers of a few players that we know and love. I don't think Danilo will be able to hang around and make that squad. Toffolo's obviously going to be out. I don't think there's going to be a place for Zach Abbott to develop the way that we would like him, and certainly the squad would be ripped apart. However, conversely, I will just say that's bollocks. We have to make the Champions League. We've had an absolutely brilliant season, and when else are we going to have a shot of making the Champions League? And you've got to take the chance, like Goran Ivanisevic in the 2001 Wimbledon final. His one chance to win, and he took it. This is right now our chance to make the Champions League. And it'll be heartbreaking for us, given that we're so close. And so then we'll just be back to the point of does Nottingham Forest have a copyright or mortgage on end of season bottlets? And this is just going to be another one that we add to that litany of bloody moments of just where everything's gone wrong at the end of the season. I can understand it. And
how can you say that while Arsenal and Tottenham exist?
Oh, Wowzer's pretty good. Like, looking through them, we've got what about the one, the worst? Oh goodness, the Sabrila Mucci 7th on the final day one where we had that was
bonkers. But you've touched on something which is really important, and I think this is for those who are desperate to make Champions League. This is their primary contention, which is, aside from it's a lot more lucrative, which I'm prepared to concede, it's always, well, if we don't make Champions League, we're going to lose all our best players. Let's be real. If in the summer, Man City, regardless of where Forest end up, come to Forest and say, we'll give you 100 million quid for Morgan Gibbs-White, we're rebuilding and we're prepared to flash the cash, he's gone. Does Morgan love us? Yes. Do we love him? Yes. Would he stay at Forest given his druthers? I'm sure he would. I'm sure he'd be delighted to go on a Champions League campaign with Forest. But if City or if Liverpool or if Barcelona or Real Madrid, if we're putting Murillo into the conversation, come a-calling and the check is big enough, those players leave. That's just the reality. So I don't think...
I'm not sure Morgan Gibbs-White, though, Mark, has got the... I don't think he's good enough to be picked up by one of those, actually.
Oh, no, I think if it's Liverpool, I think in Liverpool and Arsenal and Man City, absolutely, on his day. But also, to your point as well, there's the other side of that coin, which is, are the players we have currently good enough to play in the Champions League? Because I don't think there's a world, Dave, where we can spend a summer of buying players, enough of them who are good enough to bolster this squad to such a degree that Forest can go toe-to-toe in the Champions League next year. I think that's going to take more than one transfer window. And so I just don't see a reality where Forest make the Champions League and are able to compete and have it be a positive experience, and we don't lose our players anyway. Does that mean we shouldn't have the experience? Does that not mean, fans don't want it and it would just be an incredible opportunity to have these amazing nights at the City Ground? I get it. I get it.
How good would a Champions League quarter final at the City Ground be, Mark? Come on.
I mean,
come on.
What are you talking about?
Come on. How good would that be, though?
Mate, we just lost 2-0 to Brentford. All right, what do we have in the comments?
All right, let's go through the comments here. Here we go. Tony in the comments is saying, pressure is too much. Let's just play the games and see where it takes us. After all, it's been a remarkable season. Could be worse. Could be needing a win to stay up. We're not so heads a wobble and cheer us on.
Like that.
That's not bad. All right. And then to Tank, well, he's a bit tougher. Absolutely shameful to lose against Everton and Brentford when in a relegation battle, never mind fighting for Champions League football. I think Everton have been in pretty good form, though, actually. That was a...
They have. I think it's more to do with the performances there. So
yeah,
Tank's coming from.
Tank comes in, players are mentally weak cowards. All right, that's maybe a bit tough.
Yeah, I'm going to back away from that one.
Yeah, maybe shouldn't.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I don't share it, but
well, sometimes it's the emotional fragility of Nottingham Forest teams in the past have been called into question. Maybe not this one. And then Paul in the comments just say we look jaded and a little tired. We do look tired, don't we?
We do. Yeah, it's kind of interesting actually, not to go back over old ground too extensively, but I was getting a little agitated by all the talk around the Man City selection and why didn't Alanga start? We know Alanga's been carrying an injury. You don't know to what extent, and we don't know, has he needed to be quite as mollycoddled as he's been in the last few games? Obviously started to get today, but prior to that, I think the last 3 matches, his time had been managed. And to your point, Aina and Wood haven't looked quite the same since they've come back from injury, because typically it takes a while to kind of get back up to speed. And so, there was a lot of kind of remonstration about the starting lineup against City and what's Nuno doing and did he make a mistake? And I'm thinking, we can't have it always. You can't say we put out our best team every single game, and when you don't, it's a mistake. And then if you do that and you put out the same team 10 games in a row, and you get to game number 11 and the wheels fall off, go, wow, they look tired. Why aren't we using the squad rotation?
Well, Nuno typically does like to play the strongest team and play the guys too much. And you can tell the impact. Moreno looked like he hadn't played for Yonks. Toffolo took a little while to get going. But back to the Man City selections. That Man City team list comes out, and you're not the biggest question mark you have on that team is not whether Anthony Alanga should be in the team. It's whether Zach Abbott should be selected at right back. Right. And let's call a spade here. That was an absolute selection masterstroke.
Yeah, he played well.
In terms of and Zach Abbott, he must have won himself hundreds of thousands of admirers from his performance in that match. And congratulations to him. And in many ways, look, you don't ever want a player to get injured in a match, but congratulations to him getting injured the way that he did, because he got to walk around, and I don't think I've seen a player get a standing ovation coming off injured. Like he literally was standing ovation from freaking half of Wembley. So, he's a genius when he gets it right, Nuno. And so on your point on the strategy of the managers, the whole point of it is a chess match, these manager matches, and the players you're picking, and 3 in midfield or 2, or you go wide and this sort of thing. And what I'll say about Nuno is he gets it right 8 out of 10 times. And guys, we have to accept that it's okay for him to not get it right 2 out of 10 times, because previously it was really hard for Steve Cooper to get it right 5 out of 10 times. And now we're sitting here getting 8 out of 10 times, and we're saying, it's not all right. So I don't think we can second guess the selections of the manager, but he doesn't have the same options off the bench. He's now got Jota Silva, though, as a terrific right back as one of his new options, hasn't he? He was so good.
Yeah, wasn't he? I mean, I see a lot of people suggesting Jota Silva is not Premier League quality. And maybe he's not. I don't know. But you never see a more eager player out there. I mean, he's up there with the Morgan Gibbs-Whites and the Ryan Yates for enthusiasm and throwing himself around. So fair play to him. All right. So we don't have a game to... I'm sure Max is going to want another pod before the Palace match, so we're not going to speculate on that. We're going to wrap up here. So I'm not going to ask you for a prediction on the next match, but what I am going to do is put you on the spot and ask you for a prediction about whether or not Forest are still going to make the Champions League. Yes or no?
I'm going to say Forest are going to make the Champions League, because we're in exactly the position I said we'd be in. We're going to get down to 6th at one spot, and you've convinced me of our draw at the end. And I think it's going to come down to the Chelsea match. And I think in 15 years' time, there are going to be YouTube clips and YouTube stories of the Champions League race on the last day. And it's going to be like the West Bromwich day when they stayed up and they got the goal at the end. Forest are going to jag a goal at the end to make the Champions League. I think it's going to be that close. It's not going to be goal difference. We're going to miss out on that perspective. And I think we're going to need 70 points. So we're going to have to win 3 and draw 1.
All right.
Which is very doable.
Yeah.
I think it might be a draw against Palace.
Well, as we bring this pod to a close, I'm going to say I don't know if Forest will make the Champions League, but I think we'll make Europe. Leicester have been relegated, and Southampton have confirmed Derby is still the worst team to ever grace the Premier League. So however this season concludes, I'm pretty happy with it. Thanks, Dave, for joining me on the pod, mate. Thanks to all the folks who contributed on the comments. Max, good luck with the end of year exams. Look forward to seeing you back on the pod soon. For now, that's us signing off from the Garibaldi Red podcast. Bye-bye.